The upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan was alive with clinking glasses, muted laughter, and the low hum of a piano drifting from the corner. The kind of place where powerful men sealed deals over bottles of aged wine, where women in designer dresses and diamond earrings whispered gossip behind manicured hands. The lighting was soft and flattering, bouncing gently off polished wood tables and gold-rimmed plates. Every detail had been curated to radiate exclusivity. At a VIP table near a window, Vanessa Cole sat alone. Her posture was impeccable, her tailored black dress simple but commanding, her hair sleek against her shoulders. Yet what drew every quiet glance wasn't her beauty or her status. It was the wheelchair she sat in, a sleek black frame with polished chrome wheels that glimmered beneath the ambient light. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity, though she hated both. For Vanessa, the chair was not a weakness, but a symbol. A scar, yes, but also a declaration that nothing, not even the accident that had left her paralyzed, would stop her. The waiter set down her wine glass and moved away with professional quiet. Vanessa touched the rim but didn't drink. Her eyes wandered to the glass panes beside her, where the city lights painted the night like scattered stars. She didn't crave the company of strangers. She preferred her own silence, her own thoughts. But tonight she was not as alone as she thought. Three men in dark suits slipped in from the bar, their movements purposeful, their presence out of place in a room full of laughing elites. The tallest of them cut across the room like a knife, his expression a mask of menace. The second brushed a hand across the edge of her table, intentionally knocking the wine glass to the floor where it shattered against the marble. The third leaned down close enough that Vanessa could smell the bitter tang of whiskey on his breath. "You should have taken the deal, Miss Cole," he whispered, his words sharp and venomous. Vanessa did not flinch. Her fingers curled against the armrest of her chair, but her face remained calm. "You're embarrassing yourselves," she said evenly, her voice carrying more authority than most men twice her size. The tallest one grabbed her wrist with force, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. The restaurant buzz quieted, but no one moved. The wealthy patrons, those who lived their lives protected by gates and bodyguards, looked away. Some fiddled with their phones, others studied their menus, pretending nothing was happening. No one wanted to get involved. But one man did. Michael Harris had been balancing a tray of empty glasses at the next table, his tall frame blending into the background the way he always preferred. He was the kind of waiter who disappeared in plain sight, polite nods, efficient service, never a wasted movement. To most, he was just part of the scenery. Tonight, however, something in his eyes shifted. He placed the tray down on a side stand with deliberate calm, his hand steady. His expression transformed in an instant from courteous to predatory, though no one but Vanessa seemed to notice. Michael moved forward with the precision of someone who had been here before, in darker places far from Manhattan. He reached for the man's wrist that held Vanessa and applied pressure in a precise angle. One born not of barroom brawls but of years of training in rooms where mistakes meant death. A sharp crack echoed through the dining room. The attacker screamed, collapsing to his knees, his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The second man staggered backward, caught off guard, his bravado melting into fear. The third froze, uncertain, his threat suddenly exposed as hollow. Michael stood between them and Vanessa now, his presence towering, his body steady as stone. His voice was low, calm, and terrifyingly certain. "Leave, now." The men hesitated, glancing at each other before retreating under the weight of his gaze. They didn't run. They staggered, dragging their wounded friend toward the door. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. The patrons, who moments ago pretended nothing had happened, now whispered, curious, even thrilled. But none of them stepped forward to thank the man who had just prevented a tragedy. Michael bent down, picking up the napkin from Vanessa's lap and setting it gently back on the table. "Are you all right, ma'am?" His tone carried no arrogance, no need for recognition, just simple courtesy. Vanessa's wrist throbbed where she'd been grabbed, but her voice was steady. That could have ended very differently. Michael gave a brief nod, already stepping back. Just did what needed to be done. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She had worked with enough security contractors to know the difference between someone who had basic training and someone like this. His movements had been efficient, economical, final. "You're not just a waiter," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Something flickered in his eyes, a flash of weariness quickly buried beneath his calm. Former military, he said after a pause, as if that alone could explain the violence he carried so easily. Well, former military, she replied, her voice firm. I'm grateful. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek business card, sliding it across the table toward him. If you ever need anything. Michael took it without looking, slipping it into his pocket. I should get back to work. And just like that, he was gone. Back to clearing glasses. Back to vanishing into the wallpaper of other people's lives. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her pulse still racing beneath her calm exterior. She rubbed her bruised wrist and stared after him, the image of his precise, almost ghost-like movements replaying in her mind. Former military didn't explain what she just witnessed. She had seen men like him before, the kind you hired when nothing else would do. Men who carried entire missions on their shoulders and vanished into anonymity. The police arrived minutes later, lights from their cruisers flashing through the restaurant's elegant windows. The attackers were handcuffed and loaded into separate cars, one cradling his shattered wrist. Crime scene technicians photographed the overturned table and the broken glass while officers moved between guests, collecting statements. Michael stood calmly by the service station, his answers clipped, precise, unshaken. No, I don't know them. Yes, I saw him grab Miss Cole. No, I didn't intend to break his wrist. I only applied enough pressure to make him let go. His voice was steady, his posture relaxed, as if the chaos surrounding him had barely touched him at all. Vanessa watched from across the room as a paramedic wrapped her wrist. Most men would be shaking with adrenaline after a confrontation like that. But Michael Harris looked as though he could have gone right back to serving appetizers without missing a beat. When the detective finished questioning him, Vanessa maneuvered her chair toward Michael, her movements smooth despite the polished floor. She looked up at him, her gaze steady. You move like someone with training, she said. He met her eyes for a moment, then glanced away. Like I said, former military. She studied him for a long beat, then nodded slowly. Well, I think you and I will be seeing each other again. Michael offered a polite half-smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Take care, Miss Cole. As he disappeared into the kitchen, Vanessa felt the strange certainty settle in her chest. This man wasn't just a waiter, and he wasn't just former military. He was something else, something dangerous, something hidden. And in a city where enemies circled like sharks, she knew instinctively that their paths were far from finished crossing. Outside, the sirens faded into the night. The city carried on, its lights brilliant, its streets indifferent. But for Vanessa Cole and Michael Harris, the game had just begun. Michael Harris slipped back into the restaurant's kitchen, exchanging the chaos of flashing police lights for the familiar clatter of dishes and the hiss of pans. The air smelled of garlic, basil, and simmering tomato sauce, but none of it touched him. He moved like a man whose mind was already miles away, rehearsing routines designed to bury the moment that had just happened. Routine, that was how you survived. You folded napkins, wiped down tables, cleared dishes. You blended back into the noise, the endless hum of other people's lives, until you were invisible again. Yet inside, his pulse was still steady from the confrontation. Not racing, steady. That control wasn't learned in restaurants. It came from deserts and jungles, from midnight extractions where every breath had to be measured, where fear was something you folded neatly into a corner of your mind. He hung his apron in the staff locker room at the end of the night, changing into jeans and a simple gray hoodie. His colleagues tossed him curious looks, half admiration, half unease, but no one asked questions. They'd all seen the way he'd moved. None of them wanted the answers. Michael walked into the cool night air of Manhattan. The city roared around him, taxis honking, neon lights flickering, the smell of roasted nuts and gasoline tangling together. But his mind was already on Queens, where his daughter Emily was asleep under glow-in-the-dark stars he had stuck carefully across her bedroom ceiling. The subway ride home was long enough to quiet the noise of the day. By the time he reached their modest apartment, tucked above a laundromat, his body moved in the same deliberate rhythm it always did. Shoes lined neatly by the door, keys on the hook, jacket hung straight. Military precision didn't die when the uniform came off. It just shifted into habit. He paused by Emily's door, the sound of her steady breathing filling the hallway. He eased it open. She lay curled beneath her blanket, her dark hair in braids, her little astronaut backpack sitting at the foot of the bed. A science project about the solar system lay on her nightstand, Jupiter colored in uneven crayon strokes. Michael's gaze softened. He crouched, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Starlight, he whispered, the nickname born in those painful months after Sarah's accident, when Emily had clung to the stars on the ceiling as if they were anchors in the dark. He kissed her forehead, then retreated to his own room. On his nightstand sat a single photo frame, Sarah laughing, her eyes bright, holding Emily as a toddler, with his serious expression already stamped into her little face. He never turned the photo down, never hid it, not even on nights when memories felt like knives. Michael lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling. He'd broken cover tonight. For 2 years, he'd built a life that was deliberately small, deliberately ordinary. Now one violent moment had undone it. He could feel it, like a crack spidering through glass, inevitable, unstoppable. Across town in a penthouse office that soared above the glittering skyline, Vanessa Cole sat in front of floor-to-ceiling windows. Her wheelchair was pulled close to her desk, a sleek piece of equipment customized to her specifications. Papers were stacked in perfect order, dual monitors glowing with streams of data, but her mind wasn't on quarterly reports or contracts tonight. Her wrist was still bruised, wrapped in a thin bandage, a reminder of how quickly control could be threatened. But it wasn't the pain that lingered. It was the image of the waiter. No, not a waiter, something more. The way he had moved, silent and lethal, like a shadow that had decided to step into the light for only a moment. Vanessa had spent her career surrounded by men who underestimated her. Boardrooms full of powerful executives had looked at her chair first, her mind second. They thought paralysis meant fragility. They mistook her resilience for stubbornness, and they always regretted it. She'd built Horizon Innovations from the ground up, turning a faltering cybersecurity startup into a fortress trusted by Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. But tonight had reminded her of something she hated admitting. Even power had limits. When those men grabbed her wrist, no amount of boardroom victories or corporate dominance could have stopped them. Yet he had. That man. Her phone buzzed, a message from her head of security. We've confirmed the 3 men work for Damian Cross's security subsidiary. Want me to increase detail? Vanessa's jaw tightened. Damian Cross, slick, calculating, always cloaked in charm. She remembered his smirk across the conference table just a week ago when she'd slid his contract back at him. I don't partner with people who try to steal from me, she had said, her voice cold as glass. His reply, sometimes protection is worth the con, had lingered like a shadow. Now she knew what his protection looked like. Thugs in suits, sent to intimidate her into compliance. Her fingers hovered over her phone before she typed back, increased surveillance, but no overt moves. If he thinks he scared me, he wins. She set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, staring at the skyline. The city glittered, indifferent to battles waged within its towers. But Vanessa had never backed down. Not when doctors told her she'd never walk again. Not when competitors tried to bury her. And she wouldn't back down now. Still, one thought looped in her mind. Who exactly was Michael Harris? The following morning, the tabloids carried a small headline buried beneath political scandals and celebrity divorces. Waiter stops assault on CEO. Local news aired shaky footage of police cars outside the restaurant, Vanessa being wheeled out under the careful eye of paramedics. Michael's name wasn't mentioned. He'd vanished before reporters arrived. But Damian Cross read every word. In his penthouse, Damian stood before his wall of windows, his reflection cutting sharp against the city. He held the newspaper, his expression cool, though his jaw worked in silent tension. A waiter, he said softly, almost to himself. 3 trained men, neutralized by a waiter. His head of security, Victor, stood nearby, arms folded. Preliminary checks show he's been at the restaurant 2 years. Before that, Navy, records are thin. Navy, Damian repeated, eyes narrowing. Find out everything. Where he came from, what he's hiding. Everyone has weaknesses, Victor. Find his. That night, Michael sat at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. Emily colored at the other end, humming softly, oblivious to the storm gathering outside their small life. His phone buzzed, a text from his neighbor. TV people came asking about you. I said nothing like you told Emily about strangers. Everything okay? Michael's stomach dropped, a weight sinking deep. Too late. The connection was made. His cover was cracked, his quiet life bleeding away. He looked across at Emily, her small hands clutching a crayon, her face lit with concentration. For her, he had left the shadows. For her, he would do it again. But deep down, he knew. The ghost wasn't gone. He had just been waiting. The city woke restless. Rain slicked the sidewalks of Manhattan, streaking taxi windows and pulling in gutters as commuters hunched beneath umbrellas. Michael Harris walked Emily to school through the gray morning, her small hand nestled in his. She skipped occasionally despite the drizzle, the braids in her hair bouncing, her bright backpack dotted with pins shaped like planets. "Daddy, do you think Neptune is really that cold?" she asked, her voice light, innocent. "Colder than your ice cream in the freezer," Michael replied with a small smile. Emily giggled, tilting her face up toward him. "Then I never want to live there." He tightened his grip on her hand, the sound of her laughter cutting through the fog in his mind. Moments like this were what he lived for, the quiet, ordinary rhythms of fatherhood. Yet even as he walked, his eyes swept the street with the unconscious vigilance of a man who could never quite let go. Reflections in shop windows, cars idling too long, men who looked twice when they shouldn't. When they reached the schoolyard, Emily tugged his sleeve, her face suddenly serious. "We're still moving, aren't we? You said it's an adventure." Michael crouched to her level, brushing a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, Starlight, we'll be moving. But remember, adventures always come with surprises, and surprises can be good." Her lip trembled, but she nodded bravely, like when I helped Tommy find his lunchbox. "Exactly like that," Michael said softly, kissing her cheek. "Now go, be amazing." She hugged him fiercely before running toward the building, her little sneakers splashing through puddles. He watched until she vanished inside, his chest tightening. Then he turned toward the subway, pulling the hood of his sweatshirt up against the drizzle. That's when he saw it. A black SUV rolled down the street too slowly, too deliberately. It wasn't the make or the color that bothered him. It was the pace, the way it seemed to orbit him, keeping just enough distance. Amateurs wanted to scare you. Professionals wanted to disappear. This was somewhere in between. Michael's pulse didn't rise. He simply adjusted his path, turning down a side street where fewer cameras watched. The SUV followed. He stopped, his expression neutral, as the tinted passenger window lowered. A man leaned out, his tone unnervingly polite. "Mr. Harris, my employer would like a word." Michael's gaze flicked to the man's right hip where the jacket bulged slightly. A weapon. His voice remained calm. "I'm running late for work. This won't take long, and it would be in everyone's best interest." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your daughter's in second grade now, right? Miss Abernathy's class?" Something in Michael's chest went cold. His eyes locked on the man, and for the briefest moment, the ghost resurfaced. His stare alone was enough to make the driver falter, shifting uncomfortably. "That was a mistake," Michael said quietly. The driver recovered quickly, though sweat dotted his brow. "Just a friendly observation. My employer values education. He's waiting at the cafe around the corner. 5 minutes of your time." Michael considered his options. Refusing might provoke escalation. Accepting meant walking into the lion's den. But every instinct told him the sooner he faced Damian Cross, the sooner he could measure the threat. 5 minutes, Michael said, his voice flat. Not one more. The cafe was quiet, the morning rush already gone. Damian Cross sat in the corner in a tailored charcoal suit, his cufflinks gleaming beneath the muted lights. 2 men in dark coats lingered by the door, their eyes scanning everyone who entered. "Mr. Harris," Damian greeted, gesturing toward the empty chair across from him. "Thank you for joining me. Coffee?" "No." Michael stayed standing. His tone was even, but his words cut like glass. "You mentioned my daughter. That doesn't happen again." Damian's smile barely wavered. "Please sit. No one is threatening your child. I merely wanted to confirm I had the right man." Michael lowered himself into the chair, his posture deceptively relaxed, but every muscle ready. 4 minutes. Damian chuckled softly. "Efficient. I appreciate that. Your intervention the other night was impressive. Those men weren't amateurs, yet you dismantled them with elegance. That suggests specialized training." Michael said nothing, his silence sharper than words. "Navy SEALs," Damian continued smoothly. "Difficult service record to access. I can only imagine the things you've done for our government." Michael's jaw didn't move. "I serve my country. Now I serve pasta." Damian leaned forward, his smile thin. "You're wasting yourself in that restaurant. My security division could use someone like you. 6 figures, full benefits, flexible hours, a future for your daughter. Not interested, Michael said simply. Before you decline, consider the alternative, Damien pressed. His voice lowered, serpentine. Civilian life is unkind to men like you. PTSD, alcoholism, sudden outbursts. Child Protective Services often pays close attention. Stability is fragile. Michael leaned forward until their faces were level, his voice a low whisper edged with steel. If you come near my daughter again, if you say her name, what happened to your men at the restaurant will look merciful. For the first time, Damien's composure cracked. Just a flicker in the jaw, a tightening around the eyes. Then he leaned back, his voice cool again. Threats don't impress me. That wasn't a threat, Michael said, standing. It was a promise. He walked out, his exit calm, precise. The men at the door stepped aside, unsettled by something in his eyes that warned them against interference. Outside, the rain had stopped. Michael pulled his hood up and blended into the flow of pedestrians, but inside his mind was racing. The storm had shifted. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. Damien had marked him, and by extension, Emily. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but instinct told him to answer. Mr. Harris, a woman's voice, firm but cautious. This is Vanessa Cole. We need to talk. I believe you're in danger. Michael's jaw tightened. I'm handling it. I'm sure you are, Vanessa replied. There was something in her tone, measured, analytical, that reminded him of intelligence briefings. But Damien Cross isn't just after me. He's after military-grade encryption technology my company developed. If he succeeds, it won't just be business at risk. It will be national security. Michael paused, his silence giving away nothing. I can help protect your daughter, Vanessa continued, but I need your help too. Michael glanced up at the gray sky, water dripping from awnings, the city pressing in around him. He had walked away from wars before, but this was different. This war had followed him home. 1 hour, he said finally, but we meet on my terms. He hung up before she could answer, the decision already made. For years, Michael had buried the ghost, trading combat for fatherhood, blood for bedtime stories. But now the shadows were stirring again. And this time he wasn't fighting for his country, he was fighting for Emily. The morning rush had thinned by the time Michael Harris stepped off the subway in Midtown. He kept his hood up, his gaze casual but deliberate, scanning every reflection and shadow. Years of training had carved habits into his bones. Never move in straight lines, never let anyone box you in, never ignore the hairs on the back of your neck. 1 hour, that was what he'd promised Vanessa Cole. But he hadn't told her the where, only that he'd choose the terms. If she really was who she claimed, she would respect that. If not, it would show in her reaction. Michael slipped into a small deli, tucked between a dry cleaner and a pawn shop, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and frying bacon. Its chipped tile floors slick from years of use. A safe meeting spot, too ordinary for Damien's men to risk staging something here, too public for Vanessa to try anything reckless. He claimed a corner booth, setting a blue baseball cap on the seat beside him, a detail so forgettable it became a marker only the right eyes would notice. Emily wasn't with him. He had walked her straight to class, kissed her forehead, and left her in the hands of her teacher. Every fiber of him hated it, but dragging her into unknown danger would have been worse. 5 minutes later, she arrived. Vanessa Cole, the woman who had stared down corporate sharks from her wheelchair and built an empire from nothing. Today, she didn't look like a CEO gracing the cover of business magazines. No tailored blazer, no diamond earrings, just jeans, a sweater, and her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Still, she carried herself with the same calm authority that had unnerved entire boardrooms. She rolled into the deli with quiet grace, ordered a coffee at the counter like any other customer, then maneuvered toward his booth. Her chair was a sleek black model, customized for efficiency, not pity. She sat opposite him, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "You must be Emily's father," she said warmly, "and you must be the man who saved my life." Michael studied her for a moment before speaking. "You said I'm in danger. Start talking." Vanessa didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "My company developed an encryption system designed to secure military communications. If Damien Cross gets it, he could sell it to foreign interests, or worse, use it to destabilize critical infrastructure here at home. We've already detected breaches. And after what happened in that restaurant, I know he's escalating. Michael's jaw tightened. And where exactly do I fit in? Her gaze flickered, sharp and calculating. You're already on his radar. He sent men after me, but they also mentioned your daughter. Damien doesn't just remove obstacles. He uses them as leverage. If he thinks you're connected to me now, Emily becomes a target. The words hit harder than any blow. Michael's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Say her name again, he warned softly, and we're done. Vanessa didn't back down, though her tone softened. I'm not threatening her, Michael. I'm telling you the truth. He will go after the people you love. That's how men like him operate, but I can help keep her safe. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Why not hire a dozen bodyguards and leave me out of it? Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not smug, but knowing. Because I've worked with bodyguards, contractors, security teams, and none of them move the way you moved. I've seen dignitaries guarded by the best money can buy, and they still don't hold themselves like you do. You weren't just military, Michael. You were something else. You're not a shield. They are. You're a blade, silent, precise. And right now, I need a blade. The deli's background noise seemed to fade. For a moment, neither of them moved, locked in an unspoken contest of will. Then Michael broke the silence, his voice rough. Emily stays safe, non-negotiable. Vanessa nodded without hesitation. I have a property in Connecticut, remote, secure perimeter, no digital footprint. She'd be surrounded by trusted staff and protected by systems Damien can't touch. You'd be free to focus on the fight without looking over your shoulder. Michael hated the idea of leaving Emily with strangers, but he also knew Vanessa was right. He couldn't shield his daughter and battle Damien at the same time. His throat tightened as he thought of her small hands, her brave little face when she'd asked about their adventure. I'll see it for myself first, he said finally. If I don't like what I see, we're gone. Fair enough, Vanessa replied, sipping her coffee as if they were discussing quarterly earnings instead of life and death. At that moment, a tall man in a black coat entered the deli. His gaze swept the room with military precision, landing briefly on Michael before moving to Vanessa. She lifted her hand in a small gesture. Jason Reed, she introduced as he approached, former Army Ranger, my head of security. Jason's eyes never left Michael, his expression unreadable. He slid into the booth beside Vanessa, his tone skeptical. You sure about this? If I weren't, we wouldn't be sitting here, Vanessa replied evenly. Jason grunted, leaning back but not relaxing. Michael could feel the weight of his judgment, but he ignored it. He'd been sized up by tougher men in worse situations. What's the timeline? Michael asked. Tonight, Vanessa answered. Our servers are being targeted. We've already intercepted chatter suggesting Damien plans a physical breach. We move your daughter to safety, then we reinforce Horizon headquarters. You'll help my team prepare. Michael exhaled slowly, his mind already sketching contingency plans, exit routes, choke points. He hated how naturally it came back, like an old muscle twitching awake. The ghost was never really gone. It had just been buried under bedtime stories and playground trips. He stood, pulling his cap back on. I'll get Emily. We meet at your Connecticut property. From there, I'll decide. Vanessa's gaze held his, steady and unyielding. I'll make sure you don't regret it. As he walked out of the deli, rain dripping from the awning overhead, Michael knew the next move he made would change everything. He wasn't just stepping back into the shadows. He was dragging his daughter into them too. And for the first time since he'd left the Navy, he realized something chilling. This wasn't a mission he could walk away from. This wasn't about orders or flags. This was about family. The sedan cut smoothly off the highway, its tires crunching against a gravel road lined with tall maples. The canopy above cast shifting shadows across the windshield, streaks of gold breaking through the late afternoon light. In the back seat, Emily pressed her nose to the glass, her small fingers tapping against the window. Daddy, look! A deer, she exclaimed. Michael followed her gaze. A doe stood at the tree line, her ears twitching, her body frozen in perfect stillness before she darted back into the woods. Emily gasped, delighted. First adventure sighting, Michael murmured, forcing a smile. His chest was tight, though, not with wonder, but with calculation. Every bend in the road, every break in the trees, every car that had appeared in the rearview mirror since Manhattan was cataloged in his mind. So far, nothing unusual, but he trusted nothing. Jason Reed drove up front, his eyes locked on the road, his posture disciplined. Vanessa sat beside him, her chair folded carefully into the trunk. She wore no jewelry, no corporate armor, just a dark sweater, her presence commanding without effort. Even without words, she radiated authority. The property came into view suddenly, a sleek modernist house rising from 20 wooded acres. Its glass and steel lines blended into the forest like a fortress disguised as art. Michael's instincts sharpened. The sightlines were clear. The perimeter fencing was hidden but effective. Security cameras tracked silently from the eaves. Whoever had designed this place knew the balance between comfort and defense. When the car stopped, a woman in her late 50s hurried down the steps. She had silver-streaked hair, tied back in a bun, her expression warm, her voice carrying the steady rhythm of kindness. "Welcome, Mr. Harris. And you must be Emily. I'm Margaret." Emily studied her cautiously, half hiding behind Michael's leg. Margaret crouched slightly, smiling. "I just baked cookies, chocolate chip. You think you can help me taste test them?" Emily's eyes flickered toward her father, seeking permission. Michael nodded once. "Go ahead, Starlight." Margaret offered her hand, and Emily slipped hers into it, her earlier hesitation already softening under the promise of cookies. Vanessa watched the exchange, then turned her gaze to Michael. "She'll be safe here. Margaret's been with me for over a decade. She raised 2 kids of her own and now spoils mine, my staff, my people. Emily will be cared for like family." Michael said nothing at first, scanning the property. His trained eyes noted the reinforced doors, the shatterproof glass, the subtle hum of electronic jammers preventing surveillance. Finally, he exhaled. It'll do. Inside, the house was warm, not sterile. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath patterned rugs, shelves lined with books and family photos. Margaret guided Emily toward a bedroom prepared just for her. A bedspread covered in constellations, a telescope by the window, even glow-in-the-dark stars pasted on the ceiling. Emily gasped, "Daddy, they have stars here too!" Michael stepped into the room, his throat tightening. She was beaming, holding a plush bear nearly identical to the one she had left behind. Margaret smiled softly. "I thought she might need a friend." Emily clutched the bear to her chest, eyes shining. For the first time in days, Michael saw the shadow of fear lift from her face. He knelt beside her bed, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Listen, Starlight, I have to help Miss Vanessa with something important. But you'll stay here with Margaret. You remember our rules?" Emily nodded solemnly. "Stay inside, listen to the grown-ups. No phones or computers. If I hear noises, hide in the closet. That's my girl." He pulled her close, inhaling the sweet, simple smell of her shampoo, grounding himself in the innocence he was fighting to protect. She whispered against his shoulder, "Be careful, Daddy. I need you to come back." "Always," he promised, pulling back to look into her serious eyes. "I'll always come back." Vanessa waited in the hall, watching the scene with quiet respect. When Michael stepped out, she said softly, "You've taught her well." "Survival is easier when it's a game," he replied, his tone clipped, but laced with an ache he didn't show. They left Margaret and Emily behind, returning to the waiting SUV. Jason drove them back toward the city, the late sun casting long shadows across the road. Michael sat in the back beside Vanessa, silent, but his thoughts raced. "You don't trust easily," Vanessa said after a while. He glanced at her. "Yeah, you glanced at her," his jaw set. "Trust gets you killed." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Or it saves you, depends on who you give it to." Michael studied her. Vanessa didn't posture like most executives he'd met. She didn't beg for respect, she commanded it. Even in that chair, or maybe because of it, she carried a strength that couldn't be faked. Before he could respond, Jason spoke sharply from the driver's seat. "Black Audi, 3 cars back. It's been there since we hit the highway." Michael's pulse sharpened, his focus narrowing. "Keep steady. Don't speed. At the next light, pull over like we've got engine trouble. Hazards on. I'll handle it." Jason's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "We've got a civilian in the car. That's why we end it now," Michael said firmly. The SUV slowed, hazards blinking. Michael slipped out calmly, appearing to check the rear tire. The Audi rolled past, then circled at the end of the block, making a slow U-turn. In one smooth motion, Michael disappeared into the shadow of a delivery truck. When the Audi crept closer, he was already at its window. His strike was precise, a sharp blow to the carotid, the driver slumping unconscious before he even registered danger. Michael pulled the man out, slid behind the wheel, and drove the car around the corner, vanishing from sight. Minutes later, he returned to the SUV on foot, his breathing steady. He carried a confiscated phone in one hand, slipping it into his pocket. Clear, but they'll have others. Jason looked at him, something like respect flashing in his eyes despite himself. Vanessa studied Michael silently, the corner of her mouth tightening. She had guessed he was capable. Now she knew. Back on the road, the three of them sat in weighted silence, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Emily's safety was temporarily secured, but the war was only beginning. As the skyline of Manhattan reappeared in the distance, Vanessa finally spoke. Tonight is only a test. Damien wants to see how far we'll bend before we break. He doesn't realize yet we don't break. Michael looked out at the glittering towers, his reflection hard in the glass. Then let's show him. The Horizon Innovations headquarters rose from the heart of Manhattan like a glass and steel fortress. To most, it was just another skyscraper, one more gleaming tower in a city that never stopped reaching higher. But to Michael Harris, stepping through its revolving doors for the first time, it was something else entirely. A battlefield waiting to happen. He scanned the lobby as they entered, polished marble floors, soaring ceilings, security guards posted at the perimeter. On the surface, it all looked tight, but Michael's eyes didn't stop at the surface. He saw the gaps, the blind spots in camera coverage, the lagging response time of the guards, the vulnerable entry points hidden in plain sight. To anyone else, this was a fortress. To a man like Damian Cross, it was an opportunity. Beside him, Vanessa Cole rolled forward with practiced grace, her chair humming quietly across the floor. Every head turned as she passed, some with admiration, others with the subtle discomfort that always followed her. Michael noticed how she ignored them, her gaze locked on the path ahead. She'd spent years moving through rooms where people underestimated her. He could see how she wore her chair not as a burden, but as a statement. I am not breakable. Jason Reed trailed a few steps behind, his eyes alert, his military posture impossible to miss. He glanced at Michael once, as if still trying to decide whether the former SEAL was an asset or a liability. Michael didn't care. Trust was earned in combat, not in conversation. Vanessa led them into a private elevator that whisked them to the 22nd floor. When the doors opened, Michael stepped into the operations hub, a sleek, high-tech nerve center filled with glowing monitors and focused employees. Banks of servers hummed in the background. Analysts tapped at keyboards, their faces pale in the glow of screens. This is where Damien will strike, Vanessa said, her voice calm but resolute. We've seen the intrusion attempts. If he can't get through digitally, he'll try physically. Michael's gaze swept the room, his mind already running scenarios. Your people aren't trained for what's coming. They're analysts, not operators. Vanessa's eyes flickered to him. That's why you're here. Michael didn't answer. He moved to the nearest window instead, studying the street below. His instincts prickled. Somewhere out there, Damien was already in motion. By nightfall, the city outside glowed with neon, headlights threading like fireflies through the avenues. Inside Horizon, tension thickened. Michael drilled the security team, his instructions clipped, decisive, relentless. He walked them through choke points, fallback routes, communication protocols. Most of them had backgrounds in private security, some in law enforcement, but none had moved the way he demanded. He pushed them harder. Forget procedure, he barked at one guard who hesitated at a simulated breach. This isn't a drill where you wait for backup. By the time backup arrives, the package is gone, or you're dead. You move, you decide, or Damien wins. Jason crossed his arms, watching from the sidelines. You're not training them, you're breaking them. Michael shot him a cold glance. Better broken here than out there. Vanessa wheeled closer, her tone calm but firm. Gentlemen, this isn't about pride, it's about survival. She turned her gaze to Michael. Are we ready? Michael's jaw tightened. We'll see when they come. The attack started just after midnight. It began with the lights. A flicker, then darkness sweeping across the 22nd floor. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing the room in a dim red glow. The hum of servers stuttered. Then the alarms began, shrill, piercing, echoing through the empty halls. Michael's voice cut through the chaos. Positions! Security guards scrambled to their posts. Jason drew his weapon, moving with a controlled precision. Vanessa maneuvered to the operations desk, her hands steady on the armrests of her chair, her eyes locked on the main server readouts. Through the windows, Michael saw them. Black SUVs pulling up silently at the curb. Men in dark tactical gear spilling out. Their movements efficient, rehearsed. Not common thugs, contractors trained and well-equipped. Damien's people. They're inside of 3 minutes, Michael said flatly. The first breach came at the service entrance. The reinforced doors shuddered under the weight of a battering ram. Guards scrambled, shouting into radios. Michael didn't waste time. He moved fast, his body a machine of discipline and instinct. He intercepted 2 men as they slipped through the side corridor, dropping them with brutal efficiency. A strike to the throat, a joint twisted until bone cracked. He didn't hesitate, didn't blink. Back in the operations hub, Vanessa issued commands like a battlefield general. Redirect auxiliary power to the server farm. Seal off the east corridor. Lock down elevator access. Her voice never wavered, even as shadows flickered closer on the security feeds. Jason burst through the door, sweat beading on his forehead. South stairwells compromised. They're moving fast. Michael wiped blood from his knuckles, his breathing steady. Then we bottlenecked them. For 20 minutes, the building became a war zone. Hallways echoed with shouts, the thud of boots, the clash of bodies against walls. Michael moved like a phantom, his strikes clean and merciless. The ghost was alive again, slipping through shadows, dismantling threats with surgical precision. Guards followed his lead, their fear burning into adrenaline. But Damien's men didn't retreat easily. They pressed harder, each wave sharper, more coordinated. Smoke grenades hissed through vents, alarms blared. At one point, Vanessa caught Michael's eye across the room. She was surrounded by red emergency light, her face calm, unflinching in her chair. Their gazes held for a fraction of a second, an unspoken recognition that they were both fighting battles most people would never understand. By 2 a.m., the building was littered with unconscious bodies, shattered equipment, and overturned chairs. Horizon's data was still secure. For now. Michael leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning for the next threat. Jason approached, his voice rough. You just turned this place into a combat zone. You think that scares Damien? Michael met his stare coldly. It sends a message. He doesn't own the night. Vanessa wheeled forward, her hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion. No, she said softly. But this is only the beginning. Damien doesn't lose gracefully. Michael looked past her, through the shattered glass doors at the street below. He knew she was right. Tonight had been a test, and Damien wasn't finished. The real war was still coming. And for the first time in years, Michael felt the ghost fully awake exceeding him, sharp, relentless, ready. The city was still asleep when dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the skyline in streaks of pale gold. From the 22nd floor of Horizon Innovations, the glow seemed unreal. Inside, the air still carried the metallic tang of smoke, and the floor bore scuffs where bodies had clashed only hours earlier. The servers hummed, steady and unbroken, like soldiers who had survived the night. Michael Harris stood at the shattered glass doors, his hands braced against the cold metal frame. His body ached from the fight, though he showed none of it. Pain was a companion he'd learned to ignore long ago. His reflection stared back at him in the fractured glass. A man who had tried to bury his past, now forced to exhume it piece by piece. Behind him, voices murmured. The security team was cleaning up, bandaging cuts, resetting systems. Vanessa Cole rolled into the room quietly, her wheelchair gliding across the floor. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her posture was steady. She had refused to go home, to rest, even when Jason pressed her. She was determined to stand, or rather sit, where her people could see her, to show she wasn't rattled. You didn't have to stay, Michael said without turning. I did, she replied simply. This is my company, my people, my responsibility. Michael glanced over his shoulder, studying her. There was no arrogance in her tone, just resolve. The kind that couldn't be faked. He respected it, even if he wouldn't admit it aloud. She wheeled closer, stopping beside him. The skyline stretched before them, endless glass and steel. You saved us last night, she said quietly. He shook his head. We bought time, that's all. Time is everything in this game, she countered. Her gaze lingered on his face. You're not just trained, you're conditioned. You move like someone who's lived too long in the dark. Michael didn't answer immediately. His jaw flexed, his eyes on the rising sun. Finally, he said, I was part of a team. We went places we weren't supposed to exist. did things that were never going to make headlines. 3 years ago, we walked into an ambush. Half the team didn't walk out. Equipment failure, that's what the report said. But I knew better. Someone sold us out. I was the only survivor. Vanessa listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap. Michael's voice was low, stripped of emotion, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. I came home to a folded flag and a daughter who barely recognized me. 2 months later, my wife was killed in a car accident. Wrong place, wrong time. That left Emily, 7 years old, looking at me like I was supposed to hold the world together when I could barely stand. He finally looked at her, his eyes hard. That's why I serve pasta now, because blending in keeps her safe. Silence hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly against her chair's armrest. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before. I wasn't always in this chair. Michael frowned, waiting. 6 years ago, she continued, I was driving back from a meeting in Connecticut. Highway rain, slick roads, a truck jackknifed in front of me. The doctor said I should have died. Instead, I lived. But the spine doesn't forgive accidents like that. I woke up and the world was different. Everyone looked at me differently, like I was fragile, like I'd been diminished. My board tried to push me out. Competitors circled like vultures. I decided if the chair was going to define me, I'd make it a weapon. I'd prove I could run this company better from 4 wheels than they ever could on 2 feet. Her eyes glimmered, not with pity, but with iron. And I did. Michael studied her for a long moment. You don't let it stop you. No, she said simply, but it changes everything. You don't just fight the battle in front of you. You fight perception every day. And sometimes that's the harder war. For the first time since they met, Michael allowed a flicker of something like understanding to cross his face. He knew what it meant to carry scars no one else could see. He knew what it meant to live every day as proof against the world's assumptions. Jason entered the room then, his voice breaking the moment. Perimeter secure. Cops will call this an attempted burglary, but we know better. Damien won't stop here. Michael turned from the window. He'll come harder next time. Better men, bigger numbers. Jason's eyes narrowed. And what then? You expect us to fight a private war inside corporate headquarters? Michael's tone was steady, unyielding. If that's what it takes to keep her safe. He didn't need to say her name. They both knew he meant Emily. Vanessa looked between the two men. We can't just play defense. Damien's counting on us to react. We need to take the initiative. Jason raised a brow. You're suggesting offense? Vanessa's expression sharpened. I'm suggesting intelligence. Damien's operation runs on precision, supply chains, shell companies, security contracts. If we disrupt his system, he loses leverage. Michael considered this, his mind calculating. Offensive operations meant exposure, but also control. And control meant protecting Emily. Then we need information, he said finally, where his people come from, where his money flows, what he can't afford to lose. Vanessa gave a small nod. I can get you access. Databases most people don't know exist, but you'll have to trust me. Michael's gaze lingered on her. Trust, the word felt dangerous, but looking at her, unflinching, scarred but unbroken, he realized she wasn't asking for blind faith. She was offering hers in return. Later that night, after the building had quieted, Michael found himself alone in the server room. The machines hummed around him, steady and alive. He pulled out his phone, staring at a picture of Emily asleep under her starry ceiling, Orion the stuffed bear tucked under her arm. For her, he would walk back into the dark. For her, he would trust again. Behind him, Vanessa's voice carried softly. She's beautiful. He turned. She had rolled into the room quietly, her eyes on the photo before flicking to his face. She's my whole world, Michael said simply. Vanessa nodded. Then let's make sure Damien never touches that world. Michael slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression hardening. Then we move, before he does. And for the first time, it wasn't just the ghost preparing for battle. It was two broken survivors, scarred in different ways, finding strength in each other's defiance. The war with Damien was far from over, but Michael no longer felt like he was fighting it alone. The storm hit just after dusk. Michael Harris knew it before the first alarm even sounded. He was on the roof of Horizon Innovations, watching the city lights glitter against the river when the shift came. The subtle tightening of the air, the faint hum in the distance, the feeling he had learned to trust above all else. Trouble was moving closer. His earpiece crackled. Jason Reed's voice came through, terse. South cameras just blinked. We're being tested. Michael's jaw tightened. Not tested, hit. A second later, the building shuddered as the power grid surged. Lights across 22 floors flickered once, then steadied under backup systems. Horizon's engineers scrambled below, their voices sharp in the comms channel. But Michael ignored the static. His eyes were already tracking movement 3 blocks down. A convoy of black SUVs cutting through traffic like sharks through water. He descended 2 flights of stairs in seconds, his boots striking concrete with military precision. By the time he reached the operations hub, the air was charged with urgency. Analysts huddled at glowing monitors, their fingers flying across keyboards. Jason barked orders into his radio, his face pale but determined. At the center of it all, Vanessa Cole sat in her chair, calm as stone amid the storm. She had rolled herself directly into the operations desk, her hands steady on the controls that fed into Horizon's internal systems. The red emergency light painted her in sharp relief, her expression fierce, unyielding. "They're here," Michael said flatly, striding into the room. Vanessa didn't look away from the screens. "How many?" 3 SUVs, 10, maybe 12 men, well-armed, disciplined," Jason cursed under his breath. "Contractors, top tier, Damien's best." Vanessa's gaze flickered to Michael. "Then we hold." Michael leaned over the table, scanning the floor plans glowing across the monitors. "They'll breach from multiple angles. Service entrance, parking garage, possibly the roof." He tapped the map, his voice clipped, controlled. "We funnel them into choke points here and here. Force them to split, then isolate and neutralize." Jason raised a brow. "You think 4 guards and a half-dozen analysts can neutralize mercenaries?" Michael met his eyes coldly. "With the right strategy, yes, or we all go down." The building shook again as the first breach charge detonated at the service entrance. Alarms wailed, glass shattered, and shouts echoed down the hall. Michael drew his sidearm, the weight familiar in his grip. "Positions." The corridor exploded into chaos. Dark-clad men surged forward, weapons drawn, their movements sharp and professional. But Michael was already moving, his body cutting through the red haze of emergency light like a phantom. He dropped the first intruder with a clean shot, then pivoted into the shadows, striking another across the throat with bone-breaking force. Every move was instinct, every strike precise. The ghost was alive again. Behind him, Jason covered the rear with disciplined bursts of fire, his training keeping the line from collapsing. Horizon's guards, though nervous, held longer than Michael expected under his direction. They'd been drilled hard, and it was paying off. In the hub, Vanessa orchestrated like a commander. Her fingers flew across the control panel, rerouting power, sealing automated doors, locking elevators. Every order was crisp, her voice a steady anchor over comms. "Close Sector 4, redirect stairwell surveillance. Feed me their comms chatter." The attackers pushed harder, tossing smoke grenades into the corridors. Michael moved through it like it wasn't there, his silhouette vanishing into haze, only to reappear behind them. He fought with brutal efficiency, an elbow-shattering bone, a knife hand strike, collapsing windpipes, a wrist twisted until a rifle clattered to the floor. But for every man he dropped, Amber dropped, more pressed forward. Damien hadn't sent thugs this time, he'd sent hunters. In the operations hub, one of the analysts gasped. "They're breaching the east server room." Vanessa's voice cut through the panic. "Shut it down. Seal the fire doors. If they reach the cores, this is over." Michael heard the order in his earpiece and was already running. He cut through a stairwell, his boots pounding metal steps, smoke curling behind him. By the time he reached the east wing, 2 mercenaries had sliced through the lock, forcing their way into the server chamber. Michael hit them like a storm. The first went down with a strike that snapped his knee sideways. The second swung a rifle, but Michael closed distance before the trigger pulled, slamming him into the steel frame hard enough to rattle bolts. He left them unconscious on the floor, breathing heavy but controlled. Back in the hub, Vanessa's hands trembled for the first time, though she hit it well. She had rerouted the last of the backup power into the servers, keeping them alive by sheer will. Jason burst in, dragging one of the injured guards behind him. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with sweat. "They're pulling back," he panted. "At least for now." Michael entered seconds later, blood streaking his knuckles, his chest heaving. "No," he said coldly. "This wasn't a full strike. They were probing, mapping weaknesses. Next time they'll come heavier. Vanessa met his gaze, her face pale but fierce. The next time we won't just defend, we'll hit back. Michael studied her, this woman in her chair, refusing to bend even as mercenaries tried to burn her world down. Something in him shifted, just slightly. She wasn't a CEO hiding behind men with guns. She was right there with them, scarred but unbroken. Jason leaned against the wall, his voice rough. You're both insane. Damien has resources we can't even count. Michael holstered his weapon, his eyes dark. Resources don't win wars, people do. For a long moment, the room was silent, but for the hum of the servers. Then Vanessa spoke, her voice calm, resolute. Then we take this war to him. We find his pressure points and we break them. Michael gave a short nod. For the first time in years, he wasn't just reacting to the shadows. He was ready to chase them. The city glittered beneath a cold winter night, but Michael Harris felt none of its beauty. He stood on the balcony of Horizon's upper floors, the wind biting against his face, his thoughts heavy. He'd fought men before, mercenaries, insurgents, killers who hid in the shadows of foreign deserts. But Damien Cross was different. Damien didn't just want to win, he wanted to dismantle, to humiliate, to control. And now, after 2 failed strikes, Michael knew the man would turn personal. He was right. The call came just after midnight. His phone buzzed, the unknown number flashing across the cracked screen. Against instinct, he answered. Mr. Harris, Damien's voice drawled, smooth as venom. You've been quite the nuisance. Michael's jaw tightened. If you've got something to say, say it. Damien chuckled. It's not what I have to say. It's what I have to show. There was a shuffle and then a sound that ripped through Michael's chest like shrapnel. Emily's voice trembling and small. Daddy? Michael froze, his knuckles white around the phone. His voice dropped to a razor's edge. If you touch her... Oh, I haven't touched her, Damien interrupted silkily. Not yet. She's in good hands. She was very brave when my men met her at that lovely Connecticut house. Did you really think I wouldn't find her? Michael's stomach twisted. Margaret, the safe house, all of it compromised. You want me, Michael growled. Let her go. Damien sighed. Of course I want you, but leverage makes men honest. Here's the deal. Tomorrow night you come to me alone. No Vanessa, no Jason, no police. You walk into my world. You fail to show, and the girl disappears into it forever. The line went dead. Michael stood there, his chest heaving, the city lights blurring into meaningless stars. Rage flooded his veins, but beneath it was fear, the raw, consuming terror of a father who had already buried a wife and could not survive burying his daughter. Behind him, Vanessa's voice cut through the silence. Michael? He turned, his face pale, his body trembling with a fury barely contained. He has Emily. Vanessa's breath caught, but her composure didn't break. How? Safe house was compromised. His voice was sharp, self-condemning. I should have known. I should have stayed. I should have... Stop. Vanessa rolled closer, her eyes locking with his. This is not your fault. Damien has money, power, endless resources. He would have found a way no matter what. Michael paced the balcony, his fists clenching. He wants me to come alone, tomorrow night. And you'll go, Vanessa said softly. He snapped his head toward her. I can't drag you into this. Her tone sharpened, steel beneath silk. Michael, he's not after just you. He's after me, my company, the technology. If you go alone, you die. If you go without a plan, Emily dies. You don't get to do this alone anymore. Michael's chest rose and fell, torn between instinct and desperation. He wanted to shield Emily, shield everyone by carrying the weight himself. But looking at Vanessa, calm, unbroken in her chair, he realized she wasn't asking. She was telling him the truth he didn't want to hear. Jason entered then, his face grim. We intercepted chatter. Damien's men are moving out of Jersey, converging on an old shipping terminal by the docks. Fits the timeline. That's where he'll have her. Michael's voice was low, deadly. Then that's where I'll end him. Vanessa glanced at Jason, then back at Michael. We prepare tonight. Tomorrow we go together. You're the blade. I'm the mind. Jason's the shield. Damien doesn't expect us to be a team. Michael wanted to argue, but exhaustion and fear pressed down on him. For years, he had lived by one rule. Never trust, never relay, never let anyone close enough to be leverage. But Damien had already broken that rule. Emily was the leverage. And the only way to get her back was to fight smarter, not just harder. Fine, he said at last, his voice rough. But if anything happens to her. It won't, Vanessa cut in firmly. We won't let it. The hours that followed blurred into a storm of preparation. Jason mapped the shipping terminal with stolen blueprints, marking choke points and sniper nests. Vanessa combed through financial records and communication trails, identifying which of Damien's contractors would fold under pressure and which would fight to the death. Michael checked and rechecked weapons, knives, explosives, each piece of gear handled with surgical precision. But when the planning was done, silence settled. Michael found himself sitting alone in the dim glow of the server room, Emily's voice echoing in his mind. Daddy? That single word, fragile and afraid, cracked something inside him he had spent years hardening. Vanessa entered quietly, her chair gliding over the smooth floor. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. Do you want to know the hardest part about this chair? Michael looked up, surprised. It isn't the pain, she continued. It isn't the stares or the way people stare. It's the helplessness you feel in moments like this. When the people you love are in danger, and all you want is to run after them, but you can't. And then you realize you fight in other ways, not with legs, but with your mind, with your will, with everything they don't expect. Michael's throat tightened. For years, he had defined himself by his body, by what it could endure and inflict. But Vanessa's words cut deeper than any blade. Strength wasn't about muscle or mobility. It was about refusing to surrender, even when the world tried to break you. You're not helpless, he said finally. You're the reason we still have a chance. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the walls between them cracked. Two broken lives, scarred differently, but bound by the same refusal to yield. Jason's voice over comms shattered the moment. It's time we move. Michael stood, strapping on his vest, holstering his weapon. His face was carved from stone now, every ounce of hesitation burned away. I'm bringing her home. Vanessa rolled beside him, her voice steady. Then let's bring Damien down. The night outside was cold, the city humming obliviously as their SUV cut toward the docks. Michael stared out the window, his reflection hard, unflinching. For Emily, he would become the ghost again. But this time he wasn't alone. The docks were nearly silent that night, save for the rhythmic slap of waves against the pilings and the distant groan of metal cranes swaying in the wind. The old shipping terminal loomed ahead like a skeleton of steel and shadow, its rusted walls hiding secrets in every corner. Michael Harris stepped out of the SUV, the gravel crunching under his boots. The air was sharp with salt and oil, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes and never left. Beside him, Jason Reed adjusted his rifle, eyes scanning the darkness. Behind them, Vanessa Cole rolled down the ramp Jason had set, her chair humming as she maneuvered onto uneven ground with steady control. This is it, Michael said, his voice low, steady. He'll have her inside, probably wired the whole place for surveillance. Expect an ambush. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her tone calm. Then let him expect it. We're not here to hide. We're here to win. They moved together toward the terminal, the shadows swallowing them whole. Michael's body thrummed with controlled energy, every nerve on fire but his breathing measured. He had been here before, in hostile compounds overseas, in darkened alleyways where survival was a coin toss. But this time was different. This time, his daughter's life hung in the balance. Inside, the terminal stretched cavernous and cold, the flicker of fluorescent bulbs casting sickly light across crates stacked like walls. From the rafters, pigeons shifted restlessly, wings rustling. Then came the voice. Well, well, Damien Cross called, his tone smooth and mocking. The ghost himself, right on time. He stepped from behind a crate, dressed in a tailored coat as if he were hosting a dinner party instead of a standoff. Around him, a half-dozen armed men fanned out, rifles raised but disciplined. And behind them, Emily. She sat on a chair, her small wrists bound, eyes wan and wet with terror. Her hair was tangled, her little shoes scuffed. The moment Michael saw her, his world narrowed to a single point. Daddy, she cried, her voice breaking. Michael's heart clenched, but his expression didn't falter. I'm here, Starlight. I've got you. Damien smiled thinly. Touching. But let's not forget, your choices brought her here. Michael's voice was a growl. Let her go. This ends tonight. Damien tilted his head. Of course it ends tonight, but not the way you think. He gestured and his men shifted their rifles. Put your weapons down, both of you, or the girl suffers. Jason's jaw clenched, his finger tightening on the trigger. Michael raised a hand, stopping him. Slowly, deliberately, he laid his sidearm on the floor. Jason followed, his eyes never leaving Damien. But Vanessa rolled forward, unflinching in the face of rifles aimed her way. Her voice carried like steel. Damien, you think you've already won. That's your mistake. You don't understand strength. You mistake cruelty for power. But real power, real strength, comes from refusing to break. That's why you'll never beat us. Damien laughed, the sound echoing off the steel beams. Strong words from a woman in a chair. Michael's eyes burned cold. That chair doesn't make her weak. It makes her unshakable. You should have figured that out by now. At that moment, Jason's comm crackled softly, barely audible, but enough for Michael to catch it. Horizon's remote systems, patched in by Vanessa's team, had just looped Damien's surveillance feeds. For the first time tonight, Damien's eyes weren't everywhere. Michael gave the signal with the faintest twitch of his hand. In a blur, he exploded into motion. He lunged forward, striking the nearest mercenary before the man even processed the movement. Jason rolled to the side, sweeping up his rifle and firing precise bursts that dropped two more. Vanessa, already in position, hit a control on her chair that activated a small device she'd had smuggled in, a flash emitter designed to blind optics. The terminal erupted in chaos as Damien's men shouted, their scopes useless, their formation collapsing. Michael cut through them like a storm, a strike to the throat, a rifle wrenched free, a body slammed into a steel crate. The ghost had returned in full, silent, and merciless. Jason held the perimeter, every shot precise, covering Michael's advance toward Emily. Daddy! She screamed again as a mercenary grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the back. Michael's vision tunneled. He sprinted, leaping over a fallen crate, and crashed into the man with bone-crushing force. One brutal strike ended the fight. He ripped the cords from Emily's wrists, pulling her into his arms. Her small body shook, her sobs muffled against his chest. I've got you, Starlight, he whispered fiercely. You're safe now. But it wasn't over. Damien's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and venomous. This isn't the end, Harris. You think saving her changes anything? I'll rebuild. I'll hunt you forever. Michael turned, Emily still in his arms, his face hard as stone. No, you won't. With one clean motion, he raised the fallen rifle and fired. The bullet struck the steel beam just inches from Damien's head, showering sparks. The message was clear. Damien froze, his mask of arrogance cracking. He stepped back, realizing for the first time he was no longer in control. His remaining men dragged him away into the shadows, retreating as fast as they had come. The terminal fell silent except for the ragged breaths of survivors. Michael knelt, holding Emily close, his lips pressed to her hair. She clung to him desperately, whispering through her tears. I knew you'd come. Always, he said, his voice breaking with relief. I'll always come for you. Vanessa rolled closer, her face pale but triumphant. She reached out, her hand brushing Emily's shoulder gently. You're safe now, sweetheart. Emily looked up at her, eyes still wet. You helped my daddy. Vanessa smiled faintly. He helped me too. Hours later, the first light of dawn broke over the river. The terminal was empty now, save for Michael, Vanessa, Jason, and Emily. The danger wasn't gone. Men like Damien always had shadows waiting. But for now, they had won. Back at the safe house, Emily fell asleep curled against her father, Orion the stuffed bear tucked in her arms. Michael stood by the window watching her breathe. Vanessa rolled beside him, her voice quiet. She's strong, Vanessa said. Michael nodded. She doesn't get it from me alone. They shared a moment of silence. Two scarred souls bound not by pity, but by resilience. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to believe in something beyond survival. Maybe even a future. Vanessa looked at him then, her gaze steady. Damien underestimated us. The world will too. But that just means we keep fighting. Together. Michael turned to her, the faintest smile on his lips. Together. And for the first time, the ghost wasn't just a man in the shadows. He was a father, a protector, and maybe, finally, a man with something to live for. The story ends here. But let me ask you, if you were Michael, haunted by your past, yet given a chance to protect what you love most, would you step back into the shadows or finally choose to live in the light?